Hi again, everybody, and so good to see you. And I just want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people in Mi'kma'ki, where we're coming to you from Unama'ki. And we're excited today to have Stephen Augustine come and talk to us about treaties and around economic development. So without further ado, I would love to pass it on to Stephen. Do you need any support from me, Stephen, with any kind of, you can share your screen if you need to?
Can you hold my hand?
Because you never do this, right? You never do Zoom calls. I think I was asking more for my nervousness, not yours. All right, take it away, Stephen.
All right. So Nina sent me a few questions. What are the treaties? What do they mean? What treaties are established in this territory, in Mi'kma'ki, I presume? What are the benefits of the treaty? How do established treaties allow for economic development, like business, trade activities, and so on? And what is the Marshall Institute? And anything else I feel is applicable. So treaties were agreements. Today, treaties are kind of like legal documents between countries. And so the treaties that we entered into, the country that France and England kind of considered us a nation, an indigenous nation, separate nation, that they had to enter into an agreement with in order for them to be able to settle on the land and build houses and wharves and establish themselves. So when the French first arrived here, we welcomed them. We welcomed them as kind of like our neighbors. We understand ourselves. I mean, we didn't say this is our territory when they arrived, and we didn't tell them get out, get back, go back to Europe. We welcomed them and started trading with them and engaging because for the first 25, 30 years, there were no French women. And the Frenchmen ended up having relationships with Mi'kmaq women. And so a lot of children were born in that 25, 30 years. And some of the early historians say at least 150 to 200 children were born in that time frame. So a lot of the early French settlers had lots of Mi'kmaq relatives. I mean, we called them our in-laws, our brothers, our cousins. And in a 25-year, 30-year period, they developed a really good relationships. But then the English came as well. Like the French arrived here in our territory, and we didn't know that they were claiming the territory for the King of France. They didn't tell us, and we didn't give over our land to them. And the English arrived in New England. This area was called New France, or l'Acadie, or Acadia, that's what they called it. But they named it after how we say Egadi in Mi'kmaq, meaning land. So the term Acadian is actually a Mi'kmaq word. So, and the reason why we called them Acadians was they built their houses from the mud and grass that was growing in the marshes. And they never displaced us. They never interrupted our way of life. So we just welcomed them. And when the English arrived in New England, they were already had conflicts with the French. There were wars going on in Europe. And so they had to make peace among themselves every now and then. But the thing is, a lot of the French kings and a lot of English kings, they married French women, and the French kings married English women, and so on and so forth. So every time somebody married like a French woman, they would exchange properties that they had in North America. But England, they started raiding the French that were here. So in about 1710, the English took over the whole maritime area. They defeated the French, and they took over what they call New France and Acadia, and they changed the name to Nova Scotia. So the British were the ones that defeated the French, and they assumed that the French had sovereignty. And so the British took over the sovereignty of the maritime area, our land, without even asking us. So the treaties that were entered into between us and the British from 1725, was a treaty of peace and friendship that was signed in Boston. But the Mi'kmaq, they sent a few Mi'kmaq down there just to observe, but the chiefs didn't go down and sign the Treaty of Peace and Friendship in 1725. The following year, in 1726, the British came up to Annapolis Royal, and they brought the treaty up, and the Mi'kmaq chiefs, over 50, 60 of them signed their names onto the treaty in 1726. So that was a treaty of peace and friendship. We didn't surrender our land, and we didn't surrender our sovereignty. We just agreed that we won't fight against the French, and we won't fight against the British. That was what the Treaty of Peace and Friendship was all about. That's what we call those treaties from 1726. There was one in 1749 at the mouth of the St. John River. There was one in 1752 at Shubenacadie. There was one in 1760. In fact, there were several of them in 1760. And my ancestor, whose name was Michael Augustine, actually his name was Alguimo. He only had one name. And he was baptized in 1747 on August 28th, which is the feast of St. Augustine. And that's how come he got the name Augustine. And so a lot of the Mi'kmaq people, when they were baptized on a feast day of a saint. You were Saint Bernard or Saint Joseph or Saint Julian, or a lot of other French names, Saint Bernard, Saint Francis. So we were named after saints by the Catholic missionaries. So what treaties are established in our territory? I just named them off. 1760 in Halifax.
Just turn it down.
Mary, could you mute your mic, please?
Oh my.
So the treaties in 1760 were signed in Halifax, and again they signed them in June 1761. Governor Belcher invited all the Indian chiefs in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and invited them to Halifax, and they called it the Belcher's Farm, where the ceremony took place of peace and friendship, and the treaty was entered into and signed in 1761, in June 25, 1761. So that was all the way up to 1761. And then there were several other treaties that were signed in 1778 and 79 and 1780. And we signed another treaty with the Americans in Watertown in Boston, just outside of Boston in Massachusetts. So they called that Watertown Treaty in July 19 in 1776. So that's what we call the peace and friendship treaties. And so when we do land acknowledgements, that's the reason why we say this is unsurrendered, unceded Mi'kmaq territory, because the treaties that we entered into were just treaties of peace and friendship. They were not land surrender treaties. A lot of the treaties in the rest of Canada, they're numbered treaties, treaty number 1 till treaty number 11. And there were other treaties named after people. And some of them were considered by the Canadian government as surrender treaties. But the Indigenous peoples in the plains, in Upper Canada, and in the prairies, and in British Columbia, they say, well, we never realized that they never said anything to us about surrendering our land. We only understood that we were agreeing to share our land with the settlers. And so there's contentious issues about those numbered treaties. Now, today, they don't call them treaties of surrender anymore. So anyway, with us in the Maritimes, we had the pre-Confederation treaties, treaties of peace and friendship. And what benefits did we have for those treaties? Well, in the treaties themselves, they agreed that we can continue trading, like we could fish and hunt and do whatever we want to do as we used to do, to continue living as usual. And so the Indigenous people were allowed to go and hunt and fish and do whatever it was they were doing, and trade with the British. But they were, the treaties kind of suggested that they do not trade anything with the French. In fact, in 1755, over 15,000 Acadian French people were shipped out of Acadia, Nova Scotia, in boats and ships. They just collected all the Acadian French people, and there were some of the Mi'kmaq women that were intermarried with them. They were also sent away in 1755. So we lost quite a bit of our relatives in that expulsion of the Acadians in 1755. So the treaty said we can't trade with the French anymore. And we were supposed to turn in anybody who was trading with the French. So the benefits of the treaties, they didn't give us the right to hunt and fish and trap. They just acknowledged through the treaties that we could continue living the way we were living. So they didn't give us anything with the treaties. But they're called treaty rights because they agreed that we could continue living and practicing the way that we were surviving. And so a lot of the trade that was happening, we ended up having to trade with the British and with the Loyalists. After the American Revolution in the United States, which took place from about 1760 to about 1780, 82, the American Revolution happened. And what happened down there? They expelled something like 40,000 British people that were loyal to the king in England. That was called the American Revolution, because the Americans, they got tired of being taxed every time they wanted to get married. They had to pay a tax to the England. Every time they wanted to mail something back home, they had to pay a stamp tax to the King of England. Every time they bought tea or brought tea or exported something to trade, they had to pay taxes on those exports. And so they got tired. They got tired of paying for the king. And so they revolted against the king. And so the whole nation kind of got divided. And there were those that were favoring the king and those that did not favor the king. So they were called Republicans. And so United States separated from England once they gained their freedom, and they expelled the United Empire loyalists from United States, and they ended up here because the British still owned what they called British North America. And we never surrendered the land, but the British were under the assumption that it was their territory. And so we arrived to, after the American Revolution, this is all called British North America. Nova Scotia is a colonial government. New Brunswick is a colonial government. Prince Edward Island is a colonial government. New Brunswick, Newfoundland was a colonial government, but it had direct linkages to England. And so we operated, the colonial governments operated from the end of the conflicts, I guess, between the French and the English in 1763 with the Royal Proclamation. The French and the British entered into a proclamation or a treaty, and they issued a Royal Proclamation in 1763. And the Royal Proclamation protected lands that were belonging to the Indigenous peoples. And so anybody that was a British citizen or a British subject couldn't take Indigenous lands from the Indians unless they had the permission from the majority of the group of Indians that were living in that area, the majority of the men. And if they agreed, well, what happened was they had to surrender their land to the king, and then the king could grant those lands to his subjects. And that was supposed to happen, but that also never took place as well. When the British Empire loyalists, United Empire loyalists arrived here, they just grabbed land everywhere they could and registered it as their own lands. And they're the ones that established the government. So they had their relatives kind of granting lands to them, and they were ignoring the treaties and ignoring indigenous lands or Indian lands at the time. So from about 1780s right up to Confederation time, 1867, the whole maritime provinces were considered to be colonial governments. Their boss was in England, in London, the king, the queen, whatever. And it was the parliament in England that ran and paid for the government that was here. It was called a colonial government. And not until they gathered together and formed a new government of Canada. They confederated the maritime provinces, with the exception of Newfoundland, and Quebec, Lower Canada, and Ontario, Upper Canada. So in 1867, they confederated and formed the government of Canada. And several years later, in 1876, they established the Indian Act. And with the Indian Act, they identified who was an Indian, and they also identified what were the Indian lands, and they called those lands reserves. So it was the colonial governments of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia that established the Indian reserves from 1802 right up till Confederation time. And then they handed over all the Indian affairs stuff to the federal government. When the federal government was established in 1867, they had the British North America Act, and under Section 91, that was the federal government's responsibility and roles. And Section 92 was the provincial governments and their responsibilities and roles. And when that happened, the federal government took over the responsibility over Indians, and they established the Indian Act and so on and so forth. And they didn't want the Indians to go off the reserves, because the federal government said, well, we'll take care of you. We'll pay for your food and your clothing and your shelter and your education and all of those things. You don't have to even go move off the reserve. But the Indians, you couldn't keep them on the reserve. They kept going to their traditional territories and camping out there and living the way they preferred to live off the land, and relying on birds and animals and fish for their food and clothing and medicine and shelter and travel, modes of travel, sleds, toboggans, canoes, and snowshoes, and so on and so forth. So the federal government said, we'll look after all that for you. So we'll take care of that, and you don't have to go off the reserve. But the federal government didn't jump in and start helping the Indians right away. We had to more or less hunt and fish and trap in order for us to survive. Otherwise, we would have starved to death. And the government was not providing enough assistance for us on the reserves. That's why the Indians didn't stay on the reserves. And it wasn't until after the First World War when a lot of our Indian men went and signed up, and some women went during the First World War, and a lot of our men died there, and a lot came back, and some of our chiefs actually went there and came back, and one of them was Prince Edward Island chief. His name was San Lemoli, John Sark, and he married an English woman in England that he met after the war, and he moved her back to Prince Edward Island, and he was chief on Lennox Island, and they had about 7 children, and the Sarks that are from Lennox Island or Prince Edward Island are descendants of those family. Anyway, so how do treaties allow for economic development? Well, the treaty agreements, we entered into agreements, and the agreement says we had the freedom to trade with the British, with anybody in Canada. So there is a treaty clause supporting and protecting the right for us to be able to trade. And I think it's been also brought forward, like trading relations. Member 2 with the fish company, Freshwater. I think it's called Freshwater, Clearwater.
Clearwater, yeah.
So they are now able to trade with China under their recognition as an international agency. The member 2 reserve has a status ISO, I think it's called, and it's a status to be able to trade internationally, and but it's more to deal with international trade relations with Canada and China, and so they can sell their lobster in China. But some people have sold things and traded things in other countries in the world, and they try to use the treaty as a right to be able to do that. But it's not been questioned so much in the courts. People haven't been charged for trading internationally. So I don't think there has been a test case questioning Indigenous trade with Germany or England or France or whatever. So that's an area that somebody should look into as they go further on in their studies. What is the Marshall Institute? Well, the story is that Donald Marshall, who was born in Member 2, his father was Donald Marshall Sr., and Donald Marshall Sr. was the Grand Chief of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. Wow. And it's a traditional governance structure of ours. It's not an Indian Act system. The Indian Affairs doesn't control and doesn't provide money for the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. It's a traditional governance structure. And I'm also a member of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. I'm a hereditary chief because I descend from that Michael Augustine, from Rishabhakto that signed the treaty in 1760. And behind me, you could see the Grand Council flag. I'm also a captain on the Grand Council. So I'm kind of got two roles, one as a hereditary chief representing my district in New Brunswick called Siganiktu. And as a captain, I'm a Mi'kmaq captain on the Mi'kmaq Grand Council, and all of us represent all the Mi'kmaq Nation throughout Mi'kma'ki. So Donald Marshall, when he was 17 years old, he had a friend. I mean, he didn't have he didn't know Sandy Seal as a close friend. I mean, they met a few times. They played hockey. They had played basketball in school and stuff like that. And they hung out in downtown. And they had groups of young people. They called themselves gang, the Shipyard Gang. And so Donald kind of hung out with a group of young people, and they hung around downtown, and they kind of went to dances that were hosted by the churches, and in the church halls, like in the basements or of the churches, they would have dances, and but they wouldn't sell alcohol. But the teenagers that used to hang around there, I mean, they used to go out and drink a beer bottle or whatever and go back in the dance. And so that was the lifestyle that he had. And then, but one day when they were, he couldn't make it to the dance because he arrived there too late. And the same with his friend, Sandy Seal. And they met up at Wentworth Park. And while they were there, they were kind of like bumming around for cigarettes and stuff like that, and for more drinks. And they ran into these two guys, and they asked him for some cigarettes. And an old guy, I'm not going to name his name, he reached in his pocket and took out a knife and stabbed Sandy Seal in the stomach. And then he tried to stab Donald Marshall Jr., but slashed his arm, his right arm, left hand. And anyway, so the guys took off, and Donald tried to find help and call the police and so on and so forth. Anyway, finally, when all the police arrived, they found the guy laying there with stab wounds, losing lots of blood really fast, and they took him to the hospital. And the next day, this young guy died. And the police did their investigation, and they found that some young people testified against Donald in saying that they saw him stab Sandy Seal, and the old man and his friend were never reported or never found out or things like that. And so Donald Marshall was charged with murder, and he went to court and trial, and they found him guilty with a jury. And so he went to jail. And he spent 11 years in prison, and until he kept writing letters to friends and people, and finally they responded, and somebody came up and said that they know who did it, and so. Finally, when the RCMP and other police did their investigation, they found out that he was actually not the person that stabbed Sandy Seal, and so they released him from prison. And so that was in dates 1971 when he was 17 until 1982. He spent 11 years in prison for something he didn't do. And so they established a royal commission looking into what happened with Donald Marshall, and they found out all kinds of bad things that the police should have done, could have done, that the lawyers and crown prosecutor and judges, I mean, they could have done things more better. And so because of that royal commission, the whole criminal law system in Canada changed. And that was because of Donald Marshall Jr. And so Cape Breton University consulted with Donald's family, his uncles, his aunts, and asked if it was okay that we set up an institute for Donald Marshall Jr. It was going to be a law institute, but we don't have a law school at Cape Breton University, so we just focused on climate change, treaty rights, fishing rights, Nedugalimk, medical issues, health issues with Indigenous people, and land claim issues. So those are the things that we're going to be planning to have, like 4 main conversations with key Mi'kmaq leaders to discuss with the federal and provincial government representatives to be able to somehow push the idea and push the policy things forward and make things better for Nova Scotia, for non-Indigenous fishermen, for our fishermen, and for the governments of New Brunswick and the federal government as well, to be able to come out with something better than rather than conflicted situations and always arguing and fighting over fishing and hunting and all those rights that were protected under the treaties, and that these are Indigenous Aboriginal rights that we've had way before Europeans arrived here. So that is what the Donald Marshall Institute is all about. And when I was living in Elsipogtog, I was asked to help an economic development group. There was a training program going on for a whole year, and some key Indigenous individuals, Brenda Gideon Miller from Listuguj and Eva Sock from Big Cove, they joined forces together and put up this economic development training program for people in Elsipogtog. And so I came in and I relied on the Mi'kmaq creation story, giver of life, grandfather, son, mother earth, and the whole sacred Indigenous family. The Catholics would say a holy family, but I would say sacred Indigenous family, in the sense that Glooskap arrived as a leader, his grandmother, Nugumi or Giju, as his wisdom and knowledge keeper, his nephew, the young person, and his mother, who brought him into the world. So I used those figures of leadership. When you're starting a business, you have to rely on leadership, and you become a leader yourself by having to figure out a business plan. How do you do a business plan? How do you write a business plan? How do you approach a bank for support or a loan to help develop your business? And so you need leadership. You have to become a leader of your own company, and you have to look after it and take care of it like a leader would do for his own people. Then we have the grandmother, the wisdom and knowledge, wisdom and knowledge, wisdom and knowledge. We didn't have universities and libraries or schools, and now we do. So we rely on books for our wisdom and knowledge. But we also have our elders in our First Nations communities, and we can go to them and say, well, is it okay if we do a smudging ceremony to open my door in my business? And they might say, yes, I can come and help you and do it for you. Is it possible for us to sell sweetgrass? We're going to make some brooms because they may help automobiles, cars, and houses and rooms smell good. Can we sell those? Can we market those? Is that okay? And the elders will say, well, yeah, I guess so. We put them on baskets and we sell them. So it must be okay. So this is where the elders, the wisdom and knowledge and your ability to do research into your business plan, and what business idea do you have, and how are you going to sell your product, whatever the product is. It could be baskets. It could be totally something else, like beauty products, like lipstick and face. There's other indigenous peoples that have developed companies, and what comes to mind is my grandson, Michael Augustine Hache. He started a cosmetic business. He's kind of like toying around with it still. He found a good job with tradition TD, Toronto Dominion, with their call center. So anyway, he's okay. He's wisdom and knowledge. And then young people, you have to rely on your own youth, your own youngness, and your ability and your strength. You see things and you look at things, and you can imagine lots of things that you could make and develop and use as products for your business. Or you could just use a business that relies on your knowledge, your like consulting business, whatever. So as a young person, you have the strength and the backbone, and that's what kind of gives strength to a business. All these young ideas and initiatives, and the strength and the energy that you carry with you in terms of doing long hours and spending lots of time packing things or putting documents together and whatever. So your youth comes into play in your business. And then mothers, they take care of us. They clean us when we couldn't clean ourselves. They wash us, they feed us, they feed us. They put clothes on us because we couldn't clothe ourselves. And they eventually kind of fed us better food. I don't say better. Sorry, I take that back, because I see a mother sitting there smiling. She just stopped breastfeeding her son yesterday, I think. I saw that on Facebook. Anyway, so the mothers are there to nurture the business. They're taking care of our business. And the idea of the mothers telling us as brothers and sisters, we have to look after one another. So if you're in a business, you end up in some kind of a chamber of commerce or an organization that has a bunch of businesses, and you have to work together to support one another. You have to buy products from one another or share your resources with one another, and so on and so forth. So the mother's knowledge and mother's care and sharing, and I think has a big role in making your business grow. That you operate in a very ethical, with honesty. You don't cheat and you don't steal money from your own business. You do everything above board with honesty and dignity and respect. So I think that's what I kind of have to offer to give you as young people. And I really, really care for how you go about your business and how you develop your business plans. And I hope you go forward into, if you want to, expand about learning about business, well, go ahead and go to a business college, or go to Cape Breton University to the Shannon School of Business, or you can go to any other university that is closer to you, maybe, I don't know. But I would suggest, I mean, if you want to better your business ideas and plans, it's the idea would be to get the education that you need to help yourself establish in business. I mean, people end up becoming bank managers, store managers, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of opportunity out there, and you just need to grab it. Anyway, I'll end it there, and I just wish you all the luck in the world, that you succeed in all your business ventures that you're going to try. Walalio. Thank you.
Walalio. Thank you, Stephen. I took so much from what you just said, and I have to tell you that I've been helping my son Cole on his virtual Nova Scotia Canadian History 11 course. And the very first thing we had to learn was the creation story. And I said, oh, wow, Stephen has the greatest interpretation of the creation story. And we opened it up and there you were. And so it was really nice. And what you told everybody tonight was really great to fit in some pieces that were missing when we were learning all of these histories. And so I'm really grateful for that. Would anybody like to ask Stephen any questions on anything that he said?
There's something on chat. I don't know what it was on.
That's mostly people just.
Treaty 3.
Yeah, represent, she said.
Yeah. Good for her.
Anybody have any questions around how treaties impact economic development or comments? I see those wheels turning, Caden, come on. I'm like, Cattery, where are you? What are you thinking?
Well, how do you think the glass eeling would affect our treaty rights if the eels were to get more endangered? Do you think? Like, how would it affect us, just in general?
If the eels are endangered, I mean, it's a livelihood. A lot of our people don't use the eel fishery as a business or in a commercial sense. I know lots of people that go out there and get a mess of eels, one night of eel spearing, or they put out an eel net for a day or a week or so and get enough eels, and they would go around giving, they would clean the eels, they would smoke them, dry them, whatever, and just clean them and give them to elders in the community and so on and so forth. I mean, it's really wonderful to eat eel soup, eel stew, whatever, or eat eel that is put in the oven after the eel has been smoked outside, and then you put it in the oven. My God, it's such a feast. And our elders are really, they love that. It's part of our culture. It's part of our traditions. If the eel gets endangered, I mean, then our traditions are endangered. In the same way that we have not been able to access our traditional territories as we please, because we run into no trespassing signs here and there wherever we go. I mean, so endangered species means endangered cultures. Our traditions would be limited in terms of what we can do and what our elders, mostly we do it to please our elders. We bring food to them, moose meat, salmon, trouts, whatever we can get, like rabbits. I mean, I remember snaring rabbits when I was like 10, 12 years old, and bringing them back to my grandmother, and she would clean them and cook them on, make a rabbit stew and things like that. And it's the same with the fish. Every time we used to catch lots of salmon, we'd give them to the elders. I mean, us young guys, I mean, teenagers, I mean, we would, but they would scold us and tell us, clean the fish first before you bring it to me. I'm getting old and I have a dull knife. I can't really clean this salmon or whatever. But it's an impact. I mean, when species are at risk, it really impacts Indigenous cultures.
And it also doesn't help how our own people they're contributing to that issue, because I know there's a reserve that's really persistent on the glass eel and taking the baby eels in their earliest point in their life stage while they're going up the rivers. They're netting them and then they're selling them to the Chinese.
Yes, I know.
So do you think that would affect our treaties negatively in any way?
Yes, it is something that our Indigenous leaders have to work on to be able to somehow not so much protect, but control the amount of things that our people and everybody else is taking from the environment. There needs to be some kind of a mechanism in place that the province and the feds and the First Nations governance people can help fix. And I think that's the only way we can do it, other than public shaming of those people that are doing that. I saw on Facebook quite a few people talking about that issue, about those eels.
Yeah, traditional. That would be nice. Yeah, yeah. Because I was talking with DFO and they're pretty concerned about that too. Because I was working with CMM just a couple weeks ago, and what we're just tagging salmon, and we're working with them, and it was pretty close experience, and it was nice being able to ask questions with the DFO officers about how they felt about it and how they watched the numbers.
I have a black cat just like yours.
Okay.
So yeah, it's always. I mean, we have to be careful that we don't end up fighting each other as Indigenous peoples. We have to kind of more or less work things out ourselves instead of looking like we're just taking it without any rules or regulations. I'm for moderating what we take from the environment.
Also, I'd like to add a little bit of something to that. I find it interesting that you brought up the creation stories, talking about the treaties, and where Caden just asked about the eels, and I kind of remember Rita Joe wrote a poem about Glooskap, and that he talked about Glooskap's cave and leaving an offering of eels when Glooskap went to sleep. There's stories like that. And Doozy also did some artwork on that story. And I also remember another story in the creation story of the eel, how the eel and the lobster fought and created the Bay of Fundy. So, which brings me to an interesting thing. When I was reading the legends, I believe, I'm not sure if it was Charles Leland or Tetris Rand, but in one of their books, I think it's the one by Tetris Rand, he compares the Glooskap legends to the book of Kalevala. Anyways, I was curious, what's this book of Kalevala? And so I looked it up, and this book was written back in the 1800s or something. But the modern story of the Book of Kalevala is they were a lot like our legends. And in fact, they were a colonized country, Finland was. And because of these legends, the people believed in their like creation stories and the legends. And it actually led to their independence and sovereignty. So I think that's very interesting. That's all.
Yeah, that was Charles Leland.
Yeah.
He wrote Legends of the Algonquins, and he kind of shifted the Glooskap story to represent more the Icelandic Viking stories.
Yeah, I caught that. He compared it a lot.
Yeah. So I was studying at St. Thomas University when there was a university professor that wrote a book. I have it on my bookshelf here in the back somewhere. Rooted in the Land, it was called, and he complained about Charles Leland changing Indigenous legends to fit the Viking stories.
Also, they in some of the names were actually in Mi'kmaq, and you can tell that there was like a shift in change. If you know the language and you know the names, you kind of, they're almost like codes.
Well, the language, our indigenous language, like from the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Wolastoqiyik or Maliseet people, and Mi'kmaq, Abenaki people, we all speak almost a similar language. There's just a slight variation in our dialects.
Yeah, I noticed.
But what Charles Leland did was when he changed the story, he came back to Fredericton, to St. Mary's, and had the son of the guy that told him the story about Glooskap. He gave the story to this guy's son, a Maliseet guy, and had him read it on a real, like a he recorded it, and so he went back to Boston, to Harvard University, and wrote that this was a story about Glooskabi, the liar, the great liar, and it's kind of like, it's like Mundu, Chimanidu.
Yeah, they distorted everything.
Yeah, Chimanidu was a creator, another name for the creator, and it ended up the priest turned it to mean the devil. Mundu, 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 Chimandu.
Stephen, before you go, Nina was asking, I think it's a great idea if everyone could turn on their cameras and we could get a group photo before you go. That would be fantastic. So if everyone who can hear us right now, turn on their camera. Jade, are you able to turn? There's Mary. Elza? Oh, there you are. Miracle. Perfect. Leela, you there? We're close. We almost got everybody.
Miracle.
Okay. No problem. We can wait a sec.
It's a miracle.
And what we're going to do is we're going to put everybody into breakout rooms, and we're going to give you guys a question to kind of ponder, and then everybody is going to come back, and one person, you can express one of the points or thoughts you had based on the question. Each group can share 1 point. So we'll just wait. We got 1 sec happening here. If you're having conversations. So we just have a few minutes left as everyone comes back. And there was some pretty good conversations I jumped into, and it was quite funny actually. I was saying how like you come into a room and it's like people are saying something mid-sentence and it can sound really funny, like if you don't know the context. But does anyone want to share something from your group chats? Ava, why don't you tell people what you were talking about with the Watertown Treaty? I found that really interesting.
Okay, can you hear me? My sound still on? Okay. Okay, once we were done discussing our awesome businesses in our communities, which was very quick because, you know, we come from awesome communities, right? So anyways, we did talk about, I said I forgot to ask Stephen one question. And that question was specifically about the Watertown Treaty. And because one thing I did, Watertown Treaty, if you don't know what the Watertown Treaty is, it was signed in 1776. The one treaty he said that was signed in America with Americans. So it was actually the very first treaty signed after the Declaration of Independence, right? And that would not have happened if we did not ally with the Americans, the Republicans. And that only happened, America became America because of our allyship. And what I find interesting though is Canadian officials don't ever bring it up. But my husband's from Boston and he had an American education and the treaties, what they teach there is different from what they teach here. Even though we're all one, we're all Wabanagi, Mi'kmaq, Unu, right? There's different education in Canada and USA about our treaty rights. And I administered I don't know more. And there was a leak, I guess what you would call a leak. Somebody took a copy of an email that a lawyer sent out to all the chiefs. And it was specifically about the Watertown Treaty. And the lawyer advised, do not teach people about the Watertown Treaty, don't ever bring it up and all this. And my question was, why? Like, why do we take that stance when we have the whole covenant chain of treaties and they're supposed to benefit all of us, all the treaties? Why are they kind of keeping the Watertown Treaty hush-hush in Canada? But when you're in America, that's the treaty that they celebrate and they gather around and they make a big shindig out of it. They recreate it. They have a whole march. They dress up like Unos and colonists or whatever. And they celebrate it so much that that treaty in America earned our people like free tuition. Like, all you have to do is from one of the Wabanagi tribes and have a residence in Massachusetts, and we can have free tuition to Harvard or MIT or any college or university in Massachusetts. It's so honored there. But in Canada, they got lawyers telling our chiefs, like, don't even bring it up. Like, why is that?
You should ask Stephen. You should
Yes,
send him an email.
and that was the question I meant to ask, but I got into like the creating stories, and then he had to leave, and then I remembered after he left. I was like,
is there anything else anybody wants to share before? Oh, Andrea, yes.
Well, no government wants to see us be educated and be united and rise. So that might be a reason. I mean, usually is when it comes to governments, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. I was like, wow, they really sound like,
yeah, but
they're trying to keep the info.
Representing the Indian Act chiefs. I guess maybe they're a different kind of government.
Right, maybe.
True.
Anybody else? Oh, we'll wrap it up because it's 8 o'clock, and I know a lot of people have worked full days and gone to school and all those things. So thanks everybody for joining. And I'm sure Nina will follow up with everybody on feedback of what you experienced in this economic development one. But it's so good to see you. I love when she said, can you pop in? I'm like, yes, I can. I love this group. So good. And Kateri, it was so nice to finally meet you. You're probably like, who the heck is that girl? Because I was like all slobby with my glasses.
Not even.
Like,
I would never say that.
I heard her voice and I was like, I know that voice.
Well, desk off now. We're gonna meet up with your exes, huh?
Yeah, Access Nova Scotia, and you gave me a really good belly laugh, like one I really needed. I said to my son after, thank you, Kateri, for that belly laugh. I really needed it. So everyone, have a fantastic day and evening, I guess. And I look forward to when I get to hop on to the next one and keep rocking it. You guys sound like you're doing a great job, and I can't wait to see everybody at the conference too. So take care.
See you, girl. Thank
Bye.
you, guys. See you,
Nice.
Dave.
Ona.
Oh no.